Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Ruben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Erica Holthausen of Catchline Communications. She helps turn experts into authorities by getting them published in places like Harvard Business Review, Entrepreneur, Inc., etc., so that instead of being well-guarded secrets, they can actually get exposure to their ideal clients and have a bigger impact in the world. Erica, thanks for joining me on Sales for Nerds. What do you have in your glass?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me, Ruben. So, what I have in my glass, because I like a little sass, is Rocket Like a Redhead's Cabernet Sauvignon. And it's
Awesome.
called the Rebel because,
What
yeah,
else would it be
as I
called?
said, I like a little sass.
Awesome. And I've got this Chateau Galateau Saint-Emilion Bordeaux blend. It's mostly Merlot with a touch of Cab Franc, and it is quite yummy and delicious. So cheers. Welcome.
Cheers, my friend.
Now, we're going to dive into how you help people in just a second. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about how you got to this place of helping people get published in these places. That's not something that you traditionally hear of as an aspiring career path.
Yeah, and I got here with the help of a great business coach. So, part of it is throughout my career, I am a recovering attorney, and then I was in the marketing world for like 2 decades. And as a part of that time, on the side, I was a freelance writer and freelance editor. So that was something that I had done, but it was always sort of on the side. And when I started my business, initially I thought, well, I'm going to do content marketing. And I was working with a business coach, and one day I just said, oh, I'm so over marketing. And he was like, well, that's a problem. And we ended up talking about a project I had worked on years ago with a different client when I had my first business. And I loved everything about it. A friend of mine who is an editor at an environmental health and safety management publication was looking for writers, and my client was an EHS consultant. So brought the two of them together, helped my client figure out how to navigate all of that, loved everything about it. And my coach said, well, so why don't you do that? And I said, well, why don't I do what? And he was like, Erica. So light dawns on Marblehead. I talked to some of my friends who are also editors, and I talked to other consultants and business owners to see if that was something folks were looking for. And it was like, oh, this actually can be a thing. So before my business even launched, I pivoted.
Got it. Now, real quick aside, what made you decide that you wanted to recover from being a lawyer?
Uh, I had very idealistic expectations of what it would be, and
Ah,
I was mostly defending poor behavior. So I was not going to save the world by defending securities folks. I was a securities litigation attorney. So
got it.
that was not where I was going to change the world.
I mean, you were changing it, just maybe not in the way
Just
you
maybe
were
not the way I
hoping. You're right.
wanted. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So you help people get published in places that are going to be very beneficial for their careers. What types of people should be thinking about trying to get published, and why don't they?
Oh, great question. So the types of folks who should be thinking about getting published, anyone who is in an oversaturated market. There are a lot of consultants in the world. There are a lot of business coaches in the world.
Hmm.
It can be one great way to differentiate yourself. The second group are any folks who really want to build their reputation and personal brand and stand out. So sometimes this is emerging leaders in the corporate world. It might be corporate executives, and it's people who actually have an idea that they want to spread. So just standing out isn't enough. You have to also, and I guess it could be, but that's not my jam. but you have to have an idea that you're trying to make that impact and make a change within your industry. And those are the folks who are best suited and who should really be doing this. So the second part of your question was what holds folks back, or why don't they do this? Some of it is publications have done a really good job of making it clear as mud to figure out how to do this. So there's a lot of mystery wrapped around this. Like, how do I actually do this? Is my writing good enough? How do I break in? Do I need to be published in order to get published? And a lot of the information that's available online about writing for publications is really geared towards freelance writers. And that's a very different animal. So that's part of what holds people back is fears around being a good enough writer, having ideas that are worthy of being published, and then having no idea how to even get started.
Okay. Now, when a lot of people hear this, they think I've got to write a book. And this reminds me of an episode I did with Rusty Shelton, who helps people write books. And he made me promise while I was interviewing him for Sales for Nerds that Sales for Nerds, the book, was coming out at some point. And of course, I have done almost zero to make that happen. And part of it is a book is a big undertaking, et cetera, et cetera. And you're not talking about a book. You're not talking about getting quoted in an article. You're talking about publishing an article. Is that right?
Yes, writing articles for these publications. So you've got the byline and you control the narrative.
Okay. So I'm imagining that most people out there who are listening to this have ideas. Like if you recorded them on a podcast like this, you give them a glass of wine and you ask them to like pontificate about what's screwed up in their industry, they're actually going to have a lot of really interesting things to say. And you and I certainly do, right? We could write oodles of things. In fact, we could almost write a book if we really got down to it, Rusty. Sorry. But how do people go from, gosh, I have a bunch of ideas to, I think this should be published in Harvard Business Review, or do you start somewhere else or whatever? Like what practical steps should people take?
Yeah. So the first thing is please don't write any articles or a book because somebody told you you have to.
Okay.
That's not the reason to do it.
Or Rusty.
Including me, 100%, including me. Really think about what are your business goals for this? Why are you doing this? When in terms of articles, part of why you want to know what your business goals are is because when you understand what your business goals are, that helps you choose the right publication that will help you reach those goals. So a great example there is, let's say one of your goals is you want to be interviewing other movers and shakers in your industry, some of the leading thinkers, and that's a part of why you want to do this. Well, Inc. will allow you to do that. Entrepreneur will not. So it brings a filter in place to say, oh, okay, this publication doesn't let me do that thing, so I don't want to write for that publication. So that's
let me just make sure I'm understanding that correctly. So,
Mm.
for example, if I say I'm going to write an article that's basically an interview where I get quotes from other business leaders and I'm going to reach out to them and with a hook, hey, we're going to publish this in Inc., that might be really useful, but that format just won't work in places like Entrepreneur.
Yeah, that is, certain publications don't allow you to do that. Certain publications do. So it's knowing where your business goals and the publication's guidelines overlap.
Okay. Now, for a lot of people, they're just going to say, well, I just want to get my name out there and associate with an idea so that the right people call me and I don't have to worry so much about filling up my pipeline.
Yeah, I hate to break it to you. You will. Because even if you get published in Harvard Business Review and it goes viral, the hordes of humans are not going to come knocking down your door. It just doesn't work that way. So it can help you. It's what I call an appreciating asset because social media only lasts for a short period of time. So we invest a lot of time in LinkedIn and possibly other platforms. That has a pretty short shelf life. An article has a much longer shelf life. As long as it is still relevant, you can use that for years. And if you use it strategically in order to open the door to opportunities, get conversations happening, get different speaking engagements, all of that can be done if you are using it strategically. But just like there's nothing passive about passive income, this isn't a magic bullet, and this is a long game situation. So if you are up against the wall and you really need to be bringing clients in, this is not the road to take.
This is a long-term investment. Okay. So let's work
100%.
backwards from I would like to get these clients and I want to use the article or articles as an asset to do that. How should I be thinking of doing that? And we can work our way all the way back, hopefully, from there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll give an example of one of my clients. Roger Dunn, every article he wrote, and he was the environmental health and safety management consultant, every article he wrote, he was writing for a specific individual. He had had conversations with them. He wanted to further that relationship. He wanted to get a seat at the table. So every article he wrote was written for one specific individual. It was published in an association publication. But then he could use that and say, oh, hey, Ruben, remember that conversation we had about such and such? I just wrote an article for EHS today. I thought you would be interested because our conversation really led to me writing this piece. Now, all of a sudden, what you have is a vetted, it's social proof. You
Mm-hmm.
have a vetted organization, an organization that vetted you saying,
Mm-hmm.
yes, this guy's ideas are worth being published. We are willing to be affiliated with them and their ideas. So, one of the things to think about is really what are the goals and then how can you use them? So, if it's opening the doors to certain folks and furthering those relationships, that's one thing. It might be I want to do more speaking for different associations. Association publications are overlooked and incredibly valuable. So I talk about high visibility publications all the time. That means different things to different people. It might be Harvard Business Review, but it might be the ICMA blog, which is a small association specific for local governments. So where your folks are matters and who you're trying to reach matters. And with associations, you often have opportunities to do more speaking, to do webinars, to do things along that nature, because if they are used to getting, their staff is usually small and overworked.
Mm-hmm.
If they're used to getting really good quality articles from you that serve their members,
Mm-hmm.
who are they going to go to host a webinar or speak at their conference? You're going to be top at their list.
And it could start with a webinar and go to the article, or start with the article and go to the webinar, right? Whatever way it's going to work. But if you provide valuable content for their members, they're going to want to do things with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Provide value and, you get value in return.
And I think that's such a great point about associations being overlooked, because unless you're in that industry, and sometimes even if you are in the industry, you don't even know what those publications are. No one outside the industry is going to read them. No one's going to find them on their coffee table unless they happen to be in EHS or whatever. But for the people in that world, they're really into it. And those places are always eager for an interesting take on things, right? Because a lot of them, they
Yeah.
kind of publish the same general stuff again and again and again with different names and slightly different words. But if you got a fresh take, that's
Yeah.
really helpful for the organization.
And that's something all editors across all types of publications are looking for. They are looking for you to add to the conversation. So, one of the reasons that people get rejected from publications when they pitch is it can be sometimes it's because the pitch is terrible, but assuming the pitch is great, it may have nothing to do with you. It may be that we just published a piece that was on that same topic and took that exact same angle. So
Mhm.
this isn't the right piece. They want to continue the conversation. So when you've chosen a publication, looking through everything for the past 6 months or longer that was written about your topic, and look for the things that get you to say one of three things. Look for anything that makes you pause and say, yes, but, yes, and, no, because. Because
Mhm.
as soon as you have that, what follows are your insights that are adding to the conversation and taking it to that next level. And that's what editors are looking for.
And hopefully, if you are deep in whatever tribe you're in, you're already reading this stuff anyway. You're probably reading the articles going, this person's nuts. They have it all wrong, which I
Yeah.
imagine would be a great opportunity to pitch a counter article or counter argument saying, here's why what so and so wrote last month is nonsense. And instead, we should do it this way.
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean that is catnip to editors because they are looking. So for traditional business publications, most of them, the reason this opportunity even exists is because they need to create more content than they possibly could pay their freelancers and staff writers to write in order to boost up SEO and get the traffic they need, which is all about the advertising revenue. So magazines have always relied on advertising revenue. When that moved online, the need for content grew exponentially. So now there's this opportunity for experts to share their boots on the ground experience with an already established audience that the publication has. That serves the publication because they need the content for advertising revenue. It serves the expert because you're getting in touch with an audience that is perfect for you. And it serves the reader because now I get to read things that are written through a journalistic lens and things that are written direct from somebody who has boots on the ground experience.
And you also end up with hopefully long-term SEO benefit, assuming they link back to your site, etc.
If SEO is your primary goal, there are cheaper, easier ways to do this. If it is one of your goals, if it is something that you are paying attention to, that is also a great filter for choosing the publication because then you would want to look for a publication that has your bio at the end of every single article with a link back. Some publications have that bio at the end of every article. Others give you an author page, and
Mm-hmm.
so it only appears once. So that's another thing that you can use to sort of evaluate.
And I'm guessing maybe some publications, do they have a no follow in those links, or do they all
That
give you a real link?
that is the extent of my SEO knowledge.
Okay, fair
So I'm
enough.
not sure if it's a no follow or if it's the other type of link. What I do know is for many of these publications, also, they want this stuff to be original and it is theirs for a period of time, usually 10 to 14 days. After that period of time, you are allowed to uh, repurpose. Basically, you can always repurpose it, but you can syndicate it, which is just take that same article and publish it elsewhere. So you can put it on your blog, you can put it on LinkedIn, and all they ask is a link back to their website because they are definitely thinking about SEO.
Right. Okay. So how does one go about getting started? Let's assume that you're listening to this, you're a consultant, you have ideas. Do I go to my local industry, or not local, but sort of the niche publication for my industry? Do I go to HBR? Um, do I start small? Do I start big? Who do I reach out to? How does the process actually work?
Yeah. So it all depends on your goals,
Sure.
but putting that part aside, it's then, you know, figure out where your people are. So one thing that I always recommend folks do is ask their clients, what associations do you belong to? Where are you hanging out? What are you reading? Where do you
Mhm.
go for additional advice? So there's two different routes here. One is where are your people going and go where they are, engage in the conversations they're already having there. The second that is related is go where the people will respect it. So not everybody reads something like Harvard Business Review, but everybody's heard of it and it has a stellar reputation. So that's another option is going either where people are going to be like, ooh, that immediately gives some great social proof, or where the folks actually are already hanging out. In terms of how to start, every publication has slightly different rules. Some are a lot easier to get into than others. Some have a pay to play model that is more and more common in the industry. The publications that do that well use those funds to pay the editors to work with the business folks, to edit the business folks writing. Not all of them have historically done it well. Some have made massive mistakes and have had to course correct, but it's a growing trend in the industry. So there's that kind of thing. And that's an application process, and you throw money their way. The good ones will also not publish you, even if you are paid up, if the article is not up to snuff. So it is in their interest and yours for those publications to really safeguard their brand. So that's one sort of direction. Some publications have guidelines. So you can look for something like Write for Us or Contribute. And if you Google that in the name of the
Right.
publication or association, you can sometimes find the guidelines. Some have better guidelines than others. Some don't bother with guidelines at all. So those, it's a more traditional pitch, and you would look for who the editor is that is either in charge of the section of the publication that you would write for, or is the web editor, and you would pitch that individual directly.
And let's suppose that we have some fictional magazine slash e-zine consulting weekly or something like that. There's probably a really consulting weekly, but let's suppose we're pitching them and we have some idea. We find that Erica is the editor in charge of that particular section. Do I reach out and say, here's my article idea with the following bullet points, or do I say, hey Erica, what's up? How do I do this? Like, what's the sort of generally accepted industry process that isn't going to cause me undue stress for no good reason?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Um, Editors are ridiculously busy, and we are notoriously terrible at getting back to people.
Okay,
So
good to know.
keep that in mind first. So what you would want to do is really do your due diligence. If you've decided, okay, Consulting Weekly is the publication that I want to get into, this is what I want to write about, really do your due diligence about what has already been talked about in that publication. Figure out where you can add to the conversation, whether it's taking a slightly different angle, or it's disagreeing with somebody, or it's adding some more nuance because something was oversimplified. Those are all great ways to start it. Then you want to write your pitch, and your pitch should be very direct and to the point. Um, don't try to be clever. We don't know you yet, and we don't care about you yet, which sounds harsh, but
But it's so
um,
true.
it's so true. Editors get a ton of these types of pitches. So the best way to stand out is to be professional and do some truth in advertising. With your subject line, keep it simple. Article pitch, colon, title of the article. Take the time to actually figure out what is a good working title for your article, because that's going to really, really matter. And just like anything else you'd write, you want that hook at the beginning. So letting the editor know what the piece is about and why it matters and why right now and why you. You've got to have standing to be writing an article about something. Facebook is where everybody and their brother can have an opinion about anything
Right.
they want to have an opinion about. Publications, you've got to have some street cred. You've got to have some experience to say, hey, this is why your readers should listen to me. Because as an editor, I don't care about you. I care about my readers.
Now, if you're not Brene Brown or whomever, you may be feeling like, well, gosh, I don't know if I have the street cred. Can you say, I've worked with a dozen clients and this is what we're seeing on the ground. That's why, even though you've never heard of me, I'm
Yeah.
okay to talk about this.
Yeah. Great question, because you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be well known, you don't have to have a book published, you don't have to be published elsewhere. None of that matters for experts who are writing for publications. What street cred means in this case, this can be your education, the years of experience you've had as a consultant or as an expert in your field. If you've worked with some very prestigious clients, like name drop, you want to be the braggadocious guy, gal at the party that nobody wants to be around because they just think they're the best thing since sliced bread. In your pitch, you want to be that person and basically do the name drops if there are name drops that are appropriate. If you have written for other places, include that. If you've appeared on podcasts, include that. If you've been quoted someplace, that can go into. Now, you don't want this to be a list that's as long as your arm. Pick the things that are best, that are really going to say, oh, this is somebody who is worth taking a chance on. What we're looking for when we're evaluating, and I'm a freelance editor, so I still get some of these
Mhm.
pitches. What we are looking for when we evaluate pitches is this somebody I can trust with my readers? So if I see that somebody else has already vetted you and that I already know and respect that somebody else, whether it's a publication or a podcast or a speaking engagement for a particular association or conference, that's going to give me additional comfort in saying, okay, this person's actually going to provide value to my readers.
And they're not committing at this point to publishing your piece. They're just basically committing to responding. Like make
Yes.
it worthwhile enough that this person will respond and say, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. Is that the response we're hoping for?
Yeah, basically it's like, yes, love the idea, submit your piece. So what I also recommend for, which would never work for freelancers, but for experts who are writing for publications, write your piece before you pitch your piece. The
Mm,
reason I say that is first, none of your writing is ever, ever, ever going to go to waste. You can use it in your email newsletter, you can pop it on your blog, you can put it into LinkedIn. It's not going to go to
right.
waste. The other reason I say that is I have seen time and time again, folks will pitch an idea, they get a yes, and then they freeze. And like your brain goes blank, and suddenly you know nothing. And then you have a
Right.
deadline and you're feeling bad and you're not sure. And what if it's not good enough? And like you so overthink it that you can easily end up spinning out. The other benefit of writing the piece before you pitch the piece is your pitch is stronger because you know exactly what your points are. I will outline an article I want to write, and oftentimes in the writing of the article, I change direction. So if you've written it and then you're pitching it, those match up really nicely.
I think that's such an important point about the difference between freelance writing, where you have to wait to get the okay to proceed,
Yeah.
versus expert writing, where that content is going to be deployed one way or another. And you're just going to be willing to wait a little bit and see if it can be deployed by somebody else first.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's so helpful. So ideally, do we send pitches to multiple people for the same article, or do you have to like be exclusive?
You got to be exclusive,
Okay.
in part because wouldn't you feel horrible if two publications said yes to the same piece and then you had to tell one of them, oh, so sorry, I'm going with these guys? Like
You totally
that's
would.
just
That
awkward.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure. So
Yep.
now, how long do you give these people who are busy, don't respond, don't care about you, etc., to say no or not follow up before you go pitch to a different place?
Yeah, great question too. So what I always recommend folks do is at the end of the pitch, so you kind of tell them what it's about, you give your bullet points, you will probably need links to a couple of clips in the industry, which is just writing samples. So anything you've already published on your blog, on LinkedIn, on Medium, that kind of thing. Um, and then as you're wrapping up, you want to say something like, if I don't hear back from you by such and such a date, I will reach out again. That should probably be about 10 days from the day you send it. And as soon as you send it, mark your calendar so that you are following up 10 days later and you are right on it and on time. When you follow up, you want to forward that original email back to them.
Hmm?
That way they don't have to dig for it
Yep.
and they have all of the context right there. Depending on how important that particular publication is, you can follow up. When something has been very important to me, I have followed up 5 times. When I'm
So
like, yeah,
that's
I'd like this, but I don't like, I can go other places, I'll follow up 3 times. And in that final follow up, give them an out and give yourself an out. And I always say, if I don't hear back by such and such a time, I will assume that this is not of interest and I will pitch it elsewhere.
got it. So,
Then you're free and clear.
and is it always a 10-day interval, or does that interval change as you go through the repetitions?
It doesn't have to be a full 10 days, but not two. Like assume, so give the editor the benefit of the doubt that they are on vacation.
Right.
So give it at least a week.
Got it. So every interval should be at least 7 to 10 days, basically.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you really
That's what I
want to
would
be in
recommend.
HBR or whatever it is, this could be a month and a half process
Yes.
before you
And
even know.
yes. And so with a publication like HBR, um, they are slightly their own animal. You basically need to get an introduction.
Okay.
So they are more closely guarded. Unlike some of the other business magazines we were talking about, HBR does not need advertising revenue. They
Right.
get it, but they have
Right.
a big, huge endowment from the Crimson. So
Right.
they're okay. So they are basically the hardest one to actually get into. And that's where it's doing the research to see who do you know who already writes for them. Um, and don't just call anybody who you see that writes from it's like, hey, can I get an introduction to your editor? That is a big, big, big ask. So it's an appropriate ask if you've built the relationship, but it's a big ask if it kind of comes out of the blue. So that's where you do your research. You can sometimes connect directly with editors when Twitter was a thing.
Right.
Lots of editors were actually on Twitter, and you could connect with them there and really build a relationship. Um, but that's really for Harvard Business Review, it's all about that relationship. They want you to have a relationship with an editor or be introduced to an editor.
Now, would it follow from this that unless you have really just, you're on the verge of some Nobel winning discovery, like maybe you don't start with HBR, you start with your local, your tribe trade publications, some other places first, and you kind of use those as stepping stones to more exclusive publications?
So you certainly can do that. It's sort of the ladder up method. You start here and then you use that to build the credibility to start other places, but you don't necessarily have to. So one of my clients, her very first article was published in Harvard Business Review because a friend of hers who she had known for a long time introduced her to his editor. And then all of a sudden she had this introduction. She hadn't even decided what she was writing yet and had to come up with something and did the whole process. But so you can start there if the fit is right. One of the other things to know about Harvard Business Review and all publications, different publications operate differently in terms of how you write for them. So Harvard Business Review, you are pitching one-off ideas. So it's one idea, you pitch it, they say yes or no, you write the thing. Um, then if you want to write another article for them, you pitch it again to that same editor, but you're pitching it again. With something like Inc., for example, they are looking for columnists. So you pitch once. If they say yes to your column, you are just writing and submitting pieces. So knowing your own personality as well about whether you like the pitch process will help figure out which publication you want to go for. Another piece of this is different publications have a different both editorial standard and editorial design. So a lot of publications these days have an editorial pool. So you don't get one editor
Ooh.
who you're working with directly. It's somebody different every time. It's whoever's on call that day is editing stuff. Harvard Business Review, you get an editor who is a full-on partner. They are very, very active. They have a lot of ideas and thoughts and opinions. They push back on you, and you should push back on them. They're not pushing back to tell you, we think you should do it this way. They're pushing back to say, have you thought about this? Does this work here? Like, let's make this as good as we possibly can. And then there are publications that are sort of in between, where you have an editor, they will make sure that it is up to snuff for their guidelines and make some minor tweaks if necessary and publish it. So
I want to go back to something you kind of dropped in the middle, and I thought it was really intriguing, and you're just like, it's just part of my world. So it didn't seem that amazing to you, but the notion of you can pitch and you can become a columnist.
mm-hmm.
How does that work? I assume that the magazine loves that they get expert advice that they're not paying for, expert content they're not paying for, but you get ongoing opportunities to engage with your audience.
Yeah.
How do you know, for example, which publications expect that and which don't want that? You mentioned HBR and Inc., but
Yeah.
out of everybody, like, how does that work?
Yeah. So some publications actually have guidelines and they will tell you what they are looking for. A lot of publications don't. So they don't necessarily tell you. So then you can choose, I'm going to pitch a column and see if that flies. So you get to choose in that case. With associations, most associations, not all, but the lion's share of associations don't really know what to do with people who are happy to write for them. They don't have that really built out really well. Um, these folks tend to be very busy and overworked and frankly underpaid. But they don't have a lot of the structure in place. So, and they've been burned. Every single association has been burned where somebody has said, I want to write for you. And then it's basically been a big pitch fest where they're like, buy our stuff, buy our stuff, buy our
Right.
stuff. Don't be that person. But with those associations, you can often kind of let them know, okay, this is what I was thinking. You basically can propose what you want to do.
Now, when you're doing a column, does your column appear every time the magazine or e-zine releases an issue, or can it be like, once a month we hear from Erica?
Yeah. So I'll use Inc. as an example because I have a client who writes for them and it's an easy example to use. So online publications, the online version of publications, they are putting out content and publishing it every single day. So if you're writing a column for Inc., when you submit your piece, it's then reviewed by your editor. If everything is all set, they're like, great, you're all set. It's going to be published on such and such a date. And they work it into their rotation. So the nice thing about that is that there's some flexibility. Like if life happens and you don't get your article
Right.
in every second Tuesday,
Right.
you're okay. In the newspaper world, because people have also written columns for newspapers. Newspapers are like, nope, we have a print schedule and you are
Right.
in at this time or you are just out of luck.
Yep.
So different animal with those online.
And that could be something that maybe you can work out when you're having the discussion with your pitch. Like, I'd like to do a monthly column or a weekly or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, but most people probably don't want to get stuck trying to do a daily column.
Yeah.
Though maybe
Yeah.
some
And
people would.
frankly, I wouldn't recommend a daily column. And this is
Right.
where I become a bit of a curmudgeon. I don't talk to my very best friend every day.
Right.
There's no way you have something that important to say every single day.
Yep. I'm there with you. No argument here.
But some people disagree, and that's okay too.
So circling back to what we talked about at the beginning, let's say that you are successful with these pitches. Actually, let me ask you one more thing. Obviously, it's going to vary based on the publication and your pitch and what they happen to publish the last 6 months. But in general, like if I get rejected from 4 different places, should I feel terrible or should I just keep going? Like
Not at all.
when do I know that I need to change something up?
So that's a good question. So first, if you get any response from an editor at all, that's a positive.
Just put it in the win column right there. Even if they say this
100%.
is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're
Well,
like,
not
yes.
they won't bother wasting their time to tell you it's the stupidest thing they've ever heard. What they might say is, this doesn't work for us right now because we just did this. Please pitch again. If you get one of those, like do a happy dance because that was effectively a yes and it was just your timing that was off. If you consistently get complete crickets and you've pitched a bunch of different places and nobody's getting back to you, look at your pitch again. If you were in the shoes of the editor, would you say yes or no to that pitch? If they were pitching you to come on your podcast, would you be turned off or would you be like, ooh, this is intriguing? You want to make sure you're compelling, not confusing. You also want to make sure you're clear, not clever. So please don't try to be funny right out of the gate.
Oh man, that's so hard for me.
It is, but in writing, it is hard to land that
Yes.
properly in writing. So
Someone who doesn't know you at all.
with somebody who doesn't know you at all, if you end up writing for a publication where you have an editor, like one person who's an editor, you can build that relationship. And then, yes, you can absolutely be your full self, be funny, like you can joke around with them. That works. But when I don't even know you yet, I'm just evaluating this piece for, does this serve my people? Yes or no? And secondarily, is this person going to be a pain in the ass to work with, or is it going
Right.
to be easy? Because if you are high maintenance, I am like, that's an automatic no. And high maintenance from an editor's lens won't necessarily feel like high maintenance from a writer's lens. So, for example, if you ask a bunch of questions right out of the gate about how to pitch my publication, I have written you off as high maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair, but it's true
Right.
because I don't have the time to hold your hand to teach you how to do this. I expect that you will have done the research first and made a good faith effort.
Regardless of how clear as mud the directions may be, you think you're being nice and asking and trying to be
Yeah.
polite, but instead you're
Yeah.
just looking like a real pain in the neck.
Yeah. Yeah. The questions when you can start really asking your editors questions are once there's a yes. Once they're publishing your work, and then it can be, hey, you know, just wanted to make sure, do you have any guidelines that I need to follow as I'm going through here? So once they say yes, then you can have your list of questions ready for them to find out things like, do they have a specific word count? Do they have any writer's guidelines that you need to be aware of? Do they have any practices that they want you to follow? And some of them will be like, yeah, no, they should, but they don't.
And
But
ideally, they'll
that
have them
way,
in the guidelines, right? So you would know ahead of time, but they probably don't.
yeah, and ideally they have guidelines, but a lot of publications don't. So that's where you're showing, at that stage, you're showing, I've done my research. I haven't found any of this online. I am trying to help me help you. I am trying to make your job, editor, easier by making sure I'm following whatever the guidelines are. A silly question that's also helpful is, do they have a style guide that they use?
Right.
Are they AP or are they Chicago? Certain things, do your research first. So don't ask like how they do titles and if it's title case or that kind of thing. Just go look on the website
Right.
and figure it out. But yeah, anything that is a good question that you just like, why would you know? Those are great questions to ask the editor
After they say yes,
after they say yes.
not before. So
Yeah.
let's say they do this and you do this and they publish it and it's great. How do we maximize the impact of actually getting these things in the publication?
Yeah. So first, pour yourself a glass of wine and say
Oh,
cheers to a
done.
friend.
Cheers.
Um, celebrate those things. And then it's a series of different things. Have a plan in place when you start writing for publications for how you're going to use these things. So it might be that you have a list of people that you are going to send that article to. These could be colleagues, they could be prospective clients, they could be prospective partners, they could be mentors or people whose thinking and ideas have shaped your own.
Hmm.
And don't be afraid to reach high. If somebody who you have been inspired by is somebody like Cal Newport, send it to him. You're saying thank you and hey, your ideas shape this. Anybody who you quote in the article or cite in the article, send it to them. So have your list of who you're going to send it to and make sure that those emails are custom. Don't do a big blanket email. You will regret it. This is an opportunity to build a relationship. Otherwise, don't bother doing it. It doesn't have to be a huge list, but have a list of folks that you're going to send this article to. Share it in all of the places. Share it on LinkedIn, on all of the other socials, and don't just share it once, share it multiple times because nobody is paying as much attention to your content as you are.
And this is the
And
place where you can send a generic, hey, my entire newsletter list is getting a link to this article, right?
yes,
But it's different from
100%.
the, hey, Cal Newport, I loved your book. Would love to
Right,
have you come on Sales for Nerds. Thought you'd really like
right.
this article where I cite your blah, 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 blah. Cal,
Yeah,
if you're listening,
yeah.
come on Sales for Nerds.
Hi, Cal. I follow him closely. I think he's amazing. So he has no idea who I am. But um, Yes. So the biggest difference there is your newsletter. Those are folks who, yes, are used to hearing from you. You'll probably get a couple of like, oh, amazing responses back. That's always lovely to hear. But newsletters are easy to get lost.
Hmm.
I will go months without reading some of my newsletters, and sometimes I just do a big, huge
Yep.
dump them
Yep.
because I just don't have the headspace. A personal email from one person to another, that's going to get more attention and more likely get it actually seen. So,
And I totally agree with that. I'm just going to get on my conversational soapbox again and say, send the email just as Erica's suggesting, but also frickin' if those are the people that you have a phone number for, call them up and just tell them. And, especially
yes.
if you're thanking them or something like that. There's something about like hearing somebody else's voice, even if it's
Yeah.
just in a voicemail, that is just way beyond an email. That's I think is totally worthwhile.
That that is a place that makes cold calling comfortable to me. Yeah, and it gives you an opportunity to then have a conversation about the article and to just, yeah, be able to talk about stuff that you are passionate about and they have an interest in.
Now, how do you feel about the people who have like, as seen on and they have logos, Business Week, CNBC, whatever. Like do I add, is that an important part of this process or does it not matter?
It can be if it's done properly. So,
Oh, this sounds good.
oh yeah. So, I have a lot of opinions. So, one of the challenges with that is there are people in this world like me who, when I see those, I click on the logo. If I
Hmm.
click on the logo and it doesn't go anywhere, I assume that you are lying.
Mm. So
I
it should go to
assume
the
that there are
article.
shenanigans.
Should be a
It
link
should
to the
go to the
article.
article, or if you have an author page, it should go to the author page. So make sure that that link is there because there's a lot of shenanigans, especially in the online business world. And
Mm.
one thing is just because, like, you can send out a press release through a press release distribution service.
Hmm.
Certain news media outlets will pick up that press release and they will publish it. That does not mean you were as seen in the New York Times.
Right.
So, but people use that to then put it on their website. So, the most valuable thing that we have is our reputation.
Hmm.
Every single thing we do either enhances it or diminishes it. If you pull shenanigans, you hurt your reputation, and it's a lot harder to build it back up than it is to keep it going.
Yeah, it's funny because I at one point it was like kind of important to my professional career that I was quoted in Business Week, and Business Week like isn't even really around anymore. So I can't link back to that article. It doesn't help me very much. But I think that's such a valid point. Um, make sure that you're reinforcing and building trust,
Yeah.
not causing people to have any reason to doubt your trust.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because as soon as that, most people are like, it's some ridiculous statistic, like 70 or 80% done making the decision about whether to hire you before they even talk to you.
right.
So help them make that decision by showing that you are credible and trustworthy and impeccable with your word. So yes, having the logo there is important. I always recommend like pop it on your website, make sure it's in your email, you in your email signature, like put it all the places. This is something that is 100% brag worthy
Right.
because it is also good social proof. Just don't lie.
Yeah.
And that also brings, there are a lot of publications these days that are faux publications, in my
Hmm.
very opinionated opinion, where they'll be like, hey, for $500, we'll put you on the cover of our magazine.
Right.
Well, guess what? They sold that cover to like 1,000 other people. Anybody who knows how that works, if you make a big deal about being on the cover of this magazine and somebody knows how it works, they're rolling their eyes.
Yep.
Do not make me roll my eyes.
Yep. And this can happen even at HBR, right? Where there's a big controversy now about certain people making up data and blah 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 blah. But at least there's like people have egg on their faces and they're trying to figure out what's going on and fix it versus yeah, that's just how it works. Pay to
Yeah.
play, make up whatever you want.
Yeah. And that's another great point is make sure you fact check your work. Once upon a time, publications had fact checkers. Many of them do not anymore. Very few do. Like The Atlantic still has a fact checking department, the New York Times, but pretty much that's it. Fact check your stuff, fact check everything. Anything that you're not 100% sure of, fact check it. It can be hard to see the things that we say that aren't true, so have somebody else take a look at it and be like, does your I'm not sure if we can swear on this podcast. So does your
You can
malarkey
swear.
meter go off? Does your bullshit meter go off?
Right.
Like any place in here, does your bullshit meter go off? I have a very finely tuned bullshit meter. It helps being Irish. It's what we do. So certain things I'll see if it's like, I am the only, I am the best, I am the anything like that. Are
Right.
you really? Um,
Amazon #1 bestseller,
um
in the blah, 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 blah weirdo
yes.
category.
Yes, that's all. Yes, don't get me started.
And it's such
So,
a good point because one thing that, like, as a nerd engineer, whatever, that drives me crazy, people will give a talk, write a piece, whatever it is, and they have an anecdote at the beginning that's not related to their thing, but it's supposed to make their thing more relatable. And a lot of times they're not experts in the thing they tell the anecdote about, and the anecdote is wrong. And the entire rest of the presentation, I just don't believe a word they say. And
yep.
they could be completely right, but they didn't bother checking if the anecdote was actually true. It just sounded cool, so they
Yeah.
went with it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, you just torpedoed all your hard work.
Yeah. And please don't just say like studies show and not cite a study.
Right. People are
Link
saying,
to the study.
yeah,
The and don't link to an article that links to an article that links to a study. Link to the study and read the bloody study because oftentimes people will just read like the synopsis and take something from there. And you read the whole study and it's a whole different ball of
right.
wax. And
So,
I am one of those pains in the butt who reads the whole thing to see if it actually says what people say it's said.
right. Especially if you're making extraordinary claims, you need extraordinary
Yeah.
evidence. And I think so
Yeah.
much of this goes back to assuming you are an expert in your field and you are ethical and you do care about all this stuff, you're probably already immersed in this already. This is just
Hmm.
a way for you to take what you're doing and bring it to a bigger audience for everyone's benefit. And
Yeah.
if you're one of those shysters who thinks this is a get rich quick scheme where I don't have to do a bunch of work, I'm just going to pitch somebody and make up a bunch of stuff. Like, there are people who do that and it
Yep.
sucks, but please stop listening if that's you. Don't listen to anything Erica has to say, because we want this to just be for the good folks. Now, one thing that comes to my mind as I'm hearing you talk about all this stuff, thanks for laying out all these steps. This has been super helpful for me, and hopefully for people listening as well. But if people would like help along the way, which, I'm hearing a lot of these things and I'm like, I think probably the thing you should do at this point is call Erica, and you're too modest to say you should really call me at that point. But if somebody gets that impression and wants to call you or reach out to you, how do they find you? How do they pitch you on working with you in a way that will brand them as not high maintenance and that you'll want to get back to them?
Yeah. So a couple of different ways. Catchlinecommunications.com is my website. You can find more information there. By the way, I publish all of my prices because then we're all on the level playing field. So that's a place where you can learn a little bit more about what I do. The blog has a whole bunch of information. I'm on LinkedIn is my one and only social media platform. Please connect with me there, say hello. And a great place to start can be every month I do pitch to published. It's a free mini training and Q&A. And it's 1 hour. It's the second Wednesday of every single month. That can be a great starting place because you can A, ask whatever questions you have, and B, you can get a sense of how I operate. I'm a strong cup of tea, so I am not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. But at least you can get some ideas that are very customized to you about what your next steps are.
You are the Irish breakfast cup of tea in terms of publication assistance.
Yeah, probably with a good dose of like brandy or whiskey or scotch.
Great. Great. That sounds good. So Erica, thank you so much. This has been super informative for me. Kind of makes me rethink, gosh, maybe I don't have to start with a whole book. Maybe I should just start with an article like that. That seems a little bit more manageable.
And that can be a great way to write a book. Cal Newport and Dory Clark, you always know when they're working on a new book because their articles shift. And
Right.
what they're doing is they're testing their ideas as they're putting their book together. They're testing their ideas with articles. That also primes the pump. So once the book comes out, people who follow them closely are like, well, obviously I'm buying the book. You've been
Right.
talking about that for 6 months. So that can be a great way to start writing the book, and it can also build an audience for the book. So
Well, Erica, thank you so much. This has been great. I feel like you've been doing most of the talking. I've been doing most of the enjoying the wine. I will say cheers and let you get back to the rest of your glass.
cheers, my friend.
Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode, let them know about it. If you've got a friend who wouldn't benefit from this episode, but you just haven't talked to for a while, now's a great time to give them a call. Thanks for listening. Until next time.